Hi, my name is Daniel Foley Carter, and in this video, we will today be looking at URL inspection. So, just to provide a little bit of context, so in the previous video, we were looking at the performance tab for search results. In this video, we will be looking at URL inspection, and we'll go through a couple of examples. As with most of these videos, they're completely off the cuff, so they won't always go as smoothly as I'd like. I've got a second domain, so in the last video we used bulk.co. This is another one of my little side sites that got absolutely wiped out by helpful content update. Nothing that we did wrong, just Google being Google. So in this video, I want to explain what URL inspection is and some of the things that are in it, why they're important, and how we can use them. So the first thing that I'm going to do is we'll open up our Scooter Guide website. And we'll take one of the URLs and we will inspect it. I've just recently been transitioning between Chrome and Firefox, so finding that each browser has its own benefits. Firefox is definitely not as quick in some areas as I thought it would be. If anything, it's not even loading. So let me just use Chrome. Okay. So for some reason, it's not actually loading. So I will need to get that sorted out. That's slightly odd. Okay, we'll use bulk.co in the meantime. So the URL inspection tool, what that's basically designed to do is help us basically diagnose the state of a URL on our website. So common scenarios for that would be if we've added a page on our site, made sure that it's internally linked, but it doesn't get indexed. So what we can do is we can take any URL on our domain, and if we click on URL inspection, you'll see it just basically highlights this block. So you can paste your URL in, and what this will generally do is give us a couple of routes to diagnose things or to understand exactly what's going on. So first of all, URL inspection will have a couple of different things. So a URL will either be on Google and you'll have a green tick, or it will be on Google but it has issues. Generally, in most cases, if you see that, it will relate to structured data. Or the URL is not on Google. So there's a few different scenarios that we would see here. So if we next start going down the functionality and leaning away. So if a URL is not on Google, and in the last video, we actually we found some URLs that are no longer on Google. Let's actually go and find one that is not on Google, and then we can inspect it. So don't worry about this too much. I'll cover this in a separate video. So let's find something that doesn't have feed. Okay, 4 ways to make your home smell amazing. How pleasant. So if we go to our URL inspection, so in this one is on Google, but it has issues. And this one is not on Google. And then let's get one that is definitely on Google and shouldn't have any issues. That's the home page. So here we go. So we have URL is on Google. It's not on Google, and it's on Google, but there are issues. So we'll start here. I'll run through the generic things that you can do, and then I will run through with you on the specific states. So top to bottom, first of all, we'll see this button called Test Live URL. And this comes in very handy because there are a number of scenarios that we would want to use this functionality. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that. Now, to explain, when you put a URL in, what Google will do is Google will give you a status based on whether or not that URL. I do apologize, there's a lot of background noise. So the URL inspection will show you the state of the URL. However, that URL state might have changed. So for example, if Google last visited this whiskey URL, 3 weeks ago, since then something might have happened. So when we click test live URL, what's happening is that Google's going to that page. Then it will come back with an updated diagnosis. So first of all, can it access it? So it says that the page can be indexed. Okay. Now, Google is saying that it's available to Google, but it has issues. So there are a couple of things that we can do to check. Okay. So one of the things that we can do is simply put our URL in here. And I don't think it'll work in Firefox, but in Chrome, you can just put the site command in front of it. But we'll go to Google. Okay, and then you're going to put in site, and you can see here the URL is indexed. Okay, so it's available to Google, but it's already indexed. So, here sometimes you might see that a page availability is not available, so it might not be indexable. A scenario for that might be that in your robots text file, there might be something that blocks this specific URL, or on a page, you might have something called a no index tag or a no index follow tag. So one of the things that you can do if you see, that a page can't be indexed, is you can look at the reasons why, whether or not the indexing is actually allowed. And then we can work out from there what the issue might be. So some of the things that you can do. So we'll run through with the current scenario, and then I'll explain some other scenarios. So it's not discovered because it's not checked whether it's discovered via live test, so we don't have to worry about that. Tells us the last time that Google actually crawled it, and you can see here last time it did was when we did the live URL test. We can see obviously it was done with the inspection tool. We can see that it is allowed to be crawled. Google could get the page, and it is indexable. Okay. Here it's telling us that the canonical tag. So the canonical tag again is the tag that tells Google whether or not the page is a parent of something or whether it's a child of something. Again, that is more for the technical side of things, but this is aimed specifically at Google Search Console. But basically, Google is telling us what it can see in terms of the instruction. Are we telling Google that this is a primary page, which it is? Then obviously, if we come down here, we can see that if we click on product snippets, for example, there are issues here. That means some of the data that is in the page that Google uses to understand specific bits of data about that, there's errors with it. So if it says critical, then the feature is not likely to appear at all in search. If it's just a warning, Google can still use it, but the probability of being served goes down. So product snippets, again, as I showed you in the last video, we have search result features. When you do a Google search, you get loads of features, and product snippets are basically part of a page for e-commerce searches. So the fact that there are invalid items means that these won't be present. And then we can see obviously that there's breadcrumbs structured data. So if we look, we get basic diagnosis. So what are the things that are really key here? So the most important things that we have to ascertain is, is the page actually indexable, and can Google actually render that page properly? So here are some things to consider. So we've got the live URL test and we have the Google index. Now, if you see here, we have the option to view the tested page. So if we click on that, what this basically gives us is it gives us the output that Googlebot was able to get. Now, without this getting too complex, because, if you're relatively new to SEO, or you're sort of early on, it can very quickly become overwhelming. Try not to worry about this too much, even if you don't understand it now. But if I explain very basically what this is a web page is made of code. Okay. So if we open our Whiskey URL, okay, and then we click on view page source, this is the code that basically makes the page what it is. Okay. So when you go to www.bulkco.co.uk, product category alcohol, spirits, whiskey, this page is sent back to the browser, and this code is what's called rendered. So rendering basically is the process of the browser taking all this code, taking all the scripts, the references to images, and turning it from this into this. Okay. So the process here of taking that code and displaying it is called rendering. So if you ever hear in the SEO world people talk about rendering, rendering is basically the components being served to the browser and the browser rendering it. Okay. Now, you and me as human beings are looking at the output of that render. So the browser's put all of that code and images together, and we can see it here. So when we're looking at this, what this is doing is this code here is what Googlebot received. Okay. So when we visit in a browser, our browser makes the request, gets all of the data back, and turns that data into a web page. So what Google is doing here is it's showing you what data it got back. Now, one nifty little trick that we can do to see, is Google actually able to render our page, and I'll explain why that's important in a moment, is we can click on this copy icon. Okay, and Google Chrome, we can go to our website and we can press F12. Okay. Now, remember I said the web browser is rendering. Well, if we want to see how Google is seeing the page, we've copied the code that Google was given when it requested the page. So what we can do is we can right click at the top where it says HTML open and click edit as HTML. We can press Control and A, and then we can paste what Googlebot had, Control and V, and then we can hit enter or click out. And that's basically turns the code into what Googlebot sees. And we can see here that, Googlebot can see the page properly. Now, the reason that that's important is because, remember, Google has to come along. It crawls our website. As it crawls our website, it's able to see what that page contains, what the render looks like. And obviously, that helps Google to understand what your web page looks like. It helps Google to understand what content is in your page and how that's all put together. So you imagine if Googlebot comes to your website and there's an error somewhere and it can't get the code, then if it can't get the code, it might not render the website properly. And that might mean Googlebot can't index your content anymore, or it might index it, but it's all broken and Google doesn't really understand the context of your page. So you imagine if you were a user and the website was all broken, you'd abandoned it. So one of the key things that we have to take into consideration is, can Google see our web page the way that we do? Now, you don't have to just do this what I did. You can click on screenshot, but we can see here this is a mobile view, and we can see that Google doesn't actually give us the whole page. It only gives us part of that render. So in doing what I just did there, I could see everything, which is really important to do. So this screenshot just sort of gives you a little preview of what it looks like. And generally, if there's any obvious issues, they do tend to show themselves here. And then more info. So this is just top level information. It tells you what the content type is, tells you the response that it got. So HTTP 200 means the server said the document exists. It's okay. Page resources. So remember, a web page is made up of code, scripts, images, and so forth. Well, Google's telling us here that some of those couldn't be loaded, but if these scripts aren't actually used to make our web page, we don't really have to worry about them in most cases. So for example, here we can see that none of these scripts are on bulkcode.co.uk, so we don't have to worry. But if there was scripts here on bulkcode.co.uk and they were important ones, and our render check showed that the page was all broken, it could be that it was blocked. So for example, if you accidentally blocked a folder on your website and Google can't go and get the files from that to make the web page, then Google can't render the page, and that's bad for SEO. So that's typically when you would use the live test view tested page. We're effectively asking Google, what is it that you get and what does it look like? Does it resemble the web page that we see in the browser? And then it gives us the code, which is the code it would use to render. Okay. Now, the next part after view tested page, we also have page changed request indexing. Okay. Now, we can request Google to index content, but there are some complexities to this. So if, let's say, we have a page on the site that is not indexed, and we know this one is, because remember we did that command, we can see the page is indexed, so we don't have to worry. But if it says URL is not on Google, well, if the URL is active, so is this page active, which is very easy to check, we can see it's active. So if it's active, we can say to Google, can you index it? So what Google will do is quickly check, is the URL blocked? Is there anything stopping it from being indexed? As long as there's not, it will cue Google to go and basically index that page. But there are other things to learn. And I think one of the most complex aspects of SEO is that basic things lead on to not so basic things. And I think this is really where people tend to get caught out, and why sometimes SEO, when you're starting to absorb the fundamentals, can start then looking a bit more like a mountain, rather than a molehill. But the one thing is that with anything, always learn the fundamentals. And then once you understand the fundamentals, the next layer up becomes easier to understand, and then your growth will progress from there. Now, so Google is checking if that URL can be indexed, and as long as it is indexable, i.e. there's no instructions anywhere that tell Google, hey, don't index this, then it will queue it. Now, if the URL has been on the website for quite some time, and we can see here that it was published in October 2020, well, that was 4 years ago. So why on earth is a URL that stayed on the website for 4 years not indexed? Well, it might very well have been indexed. Now, what we can do, now you can pretty much do the exact same thing in Search Console, but we can click Add Filter Page Exact, and we can see, has it been indexed? And it's not been indexed for the maximum time frame. Now, just to repeat this, if you were in Google Search Console, you would just simply go to Performance, select last 16 months, and then we would apply that filter. Now, if you remember from the last video when I explained about SEO Stack and the fact that SEO Stack has data that goes back further, well, that's the benefit here, because this data set is limited to 16 months. So that article was posted in October 2020. So it could have been indexed for 2 years and then dropped. We can see there's no data for it in the last 16 months. So it's been on the website for 4 years. It definitely hasn't been indexed in the last 16 months. So if we go back, the URL that we've just looked at that's not indexed, Google's now saying that it will index it. But there's a reason why Google is not indexed it. Now, I know this was indexed years ago, but Google drops it from the index, okay? And sometimes the reason Google will do that is if Google crawls the content and it doesn't see that, it's a value, and I'm keeping this as simple as possible. If Google just feels that the content just is not likely to ever be served to anyone, Google will no longer index it. So if I try to explain the concept very basically, imagine the billions of web pages that Google has in its search results, okay? Billions and billions in its index. If it looks at content now and it's like, well, this article's 4 years old, 4 ways to make your home smell amazing. It's really thin content. There's not much to it. It's not likely to ever be served. Google has no reason to keep it indexed because it's not going to serve it to anyone. And it's not going to serve it to anyone because, quite frankly, look at it. It's a sorry excuse for an article. So even though it can be indexed, Google's chosen to not index. So one of the rules of thumb is that if Google is not indexing something that is indexable, there's generally a problem with it. And we'll cover that in subsequent videos. So the videos that we'll talk about this are the videos that we cover around page indexing. So we've covered viewing the live URL, looking at the output and the indexing. Now, if we go back, do you remember we said that we had various index states? So we have URL is indexed, URL is available but it has some issues, or URL is not indexed. So for the last one, we've just covered that because we've just clicked request index. So if we then go back down, we have this data here. Now the main ones are, is it crawlable? So it's important that that this is allowed, that a crawl is allowed. This is very important, that Google can actually fetch the page. And this is important because if indexing is not allowed, but it's a page that should be indexed, then we have to find out why. Now, as a very quick tip, there's 2 places that you'll find pages that are, there's 2 main places that you'll find whether a page is blocked. So the first one is you would go to your page and you would view the source, and all you need to do is search for the word robots. And if your robots says follow index, great. If it says follow no index or no index follow, if you just see the word no index, and you can search for no index to see if there's no index, and making sure that that no index is in the robots. If you see no index, then it's blocked at page level. And the other place that you will generally see control is if you go to your domain and then put in robots.txt. And what you can sometimes do is look for a part of the subfolder with the word disallow in front of it. And if it says disallow and then you see any part of the URL, then it's blocked at robots text level. So then it's a case of removing those things. So if it says indexing allowed, yes, great. And as I mentioned earlier, this is basically Google telling us, is there a parent? Now, if I explain this very quickly, a canonical tag is a basic instruction, and it might be better if I draw this out to explain it. So on a website, we might have, these are all web pages, okay? So let's say you have 50 pages on your website. And so let's pretend that, this is our Bulkco website, and this is the whiskey category. This is our whiskey URL right here. So in our whiskey page, we have our products. So we have product 1, product 2, ignore my atrocious drawing, product 3, product 4. And then we might have multiple pages. So we have page 1 of whiskey products, page 2 of whiskey products, page 3 of whiskey products, page 4 of whiskey products. So a scenario where we would tell Google that something is a parent is if we have lots of similar pages. Okay. Except, and there are exceptions to this, if we had 2 pieces of content that were like almost identical, we don't want Google to get confused between which piece of content is the parent. So a canonical tag basically allows us to tell Google if there are 2 pages, okay, and they both have similar content, very similar content, a canonical tag will say, I'm the main URL. And then you'll have another canonical tag called a canonical child. And basically what that means is that it stops Google getting confused. So if we take our little Google logo. Okay, so I'm not overly... So when Googlebot comes along and it's like, well, I'm a bit confused. Which one of these do I pick? A canonical tag basically says, ignore, don't worry about me. I'm not important. So even though it's there on the website, Google says, okay, I'll index this one. So a canonical tag will be classed as self-referencing if the main page refers to itself. So what I mean by that is if you go on a page and you view the source and then you search for the word canonical, you'll see if the URL that you're on matches the canonical, that's called self-referencing. Okay. So in this example, because the canonical refers to itself, it's the main URL. Now, we might have an instance where, there's another URL and it's almost identical. So we just tell Google, this is our main URL, so don't worry about me. So when we look at this is basically telling us the instruction that it can see. Okay, so something might show as not indexed if we've told it, that another URL is the parent. But we can see here that the URL is the same. And one way to do it really easily is you just copy and then you search. for it. And you can see it's exactly the same. So that's why it's called user declared, because user declared means that a user who runs the website has declared that. Okay. That could be webmaster declared canonical or canonical found in web page. They just refer to it as user declared. Now, Google selected canonical can sometimes mean that Google's decided, actually, what you've given me, I'm actually going to go for this one instead. So if Google decides that actually this is the better page, that's when it will tell you something different. Now, I don't want this to get too complex. As I've said, one thing leads to another. Just think of this as, this is our instruction to Google, and this will tell us whether or not Google is obeying that instruction. Okay, and if it's not, that's a separate matter altogether. And then obviously we can see enhancements and experience. So these are like the main things. So there's a couple of other things that we need to look at. So going back to the URL is not on Google. So we requested index here. Now, the URL is not on Google. Google can actually sometimes tell us why. And that's where we see this page indexing. Okay. And it says page is not indexed. It's crawled, currently not indexed. Okay. Now, in the next set of videos where I cover indexing, I'll cover this in more detail. But to give you an explanation, this is simply, let's do a clean slate. So let's say you've got your web pages on your website. Let's say, I don't know, you've got 1,000 pages. Okay. And it could be anything. So it could be food, travel, casino, whatever, it doesn't matter. So you've got your website and it's got 1,000 pages. So Google will come along. Let's try that again. And when Google comes along, what it does, and this is something that's new, relatively new, so I'll have to provide a bit of context behind this. When Google comes along, it has to ask itself the question, should I index this? Okay, now just keep in mind, I'm keeping this as simple as possible. It gets a lot more complex than this, but again, it's important for you to understand the fundamentals. Okay, you imagine if Google indexed every single piece of content on the web. Okay, so if we explain the logic, every web page has code and resources. Okay, and that data has to be stored somewhere. And the act of storing data costs energy. It costs money. So if you had 10 million websites around lemon cheesecake recipes, okay, and you had 10 million sites, and those 10 million sites took up a terabyte of data, Google's not going to serve 10 million cheesecake recipes ever. In its life, it might cycle through a few hundred. Okay. So there's no benefit to storing data that it's not going to serve. Now, it's a bit different to years ago. Years ago, Google would just index everything. Okay. But over the years, Google has basically really clamped down on the stuff that indexes. That's why you may see in the SEO communities, people talk about having issues with indexing, getting things indexed. Generally, if Google is not indexing something, it's for a handful of reasons. And one of the most common ones is that it doesn't see any perceived value in the content. Now, it could be that there's also no demand for the content. So if there's no demand for the content, it's not being served, Google's not going to index it because there's no point expending that energy, that cost. So Google will come along, okay, and it'll come to your website and it'll go da 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 da, and it'll go to that page, and it will see your nav, and it'll go to the link there, and the link there, and the link there, and it'll follow links, and it'll crawl through your site. As it goes through, it might go, here's our 4 ways to freshen your home article. No, that's just garbage. Okay, so it's discovered this as it was crawling. So this URL will go under the definition of crawled, currently not indexed. Okay, and you'll also see there's something very similar to it, and it's called discovered, currently not indexed. Now, the only difference there, it's the same principle. It's just how Google found the content. So if Google crawled your website and found it, then it's crawled it. But if it's found it elsewhere on the web, it's discovered it. But it's the same mechanism. It's just a different route to how Google found that content. So like with discovered, currently not indexed, if it discovered it, but it didn't find it on the crawl, then that might be that, there's hardly any links to that page. So Google discovered it somewhere else before it actually crawled it. So there are various reasons that Google hasn't indexed your page, and it will tell you what that non-index reason is here. Okay, now this is very vague because whilst Google gives you this data, it doesn't tell you why. Okay, so you're left as an SEO to decipher that. And literally, we're going to cover all of this stuff, so don't worry about it. But we can see here that Google's crawled it. It's not seeing any value in the article because, as I explained, it's a 4-year-old article. It's thin. It's probably a no value, so Google's just chosen not to index it. It couldn't process the sitemap, but we're not overly concerned about that. Sitemaps are really overrated. They're generally more useful for bigger sites or sites where they use something called hreflang, which is a language alternative tag. So don't worry about that too much for now. Obviously, it's not something you should ignore, but for the purpose of this education video, it's not something for you to worry about at this point in time. Referring page. So this is basically just saying, it crawled these pages and it must have found a link to that page. So we can go and have a look. And somewhere in here, there'll be a link to our house smelling nice article, which might be behind here. So we can just view the source. And then we can see it's in here. 4 ways to make your home smell amazing. So what Google is telling us here, that it crawled these pages and it found links to the article. So that's fine. Generally, because of limitations, it will only give you a handful of URLs. And then again, it will tell you when it was last crawled. So this particular article was last crawled on the 14th of September. So the fact that Google's not crawling it very often just screams volumes that the content is just not of value. And we can see that it was Googlebot desktop. So you have mobile, you have various Googlebot user agents that come to the website because obviously they have mobile crawling. But we can see here Googlebot desktop was the one that came. And again, this is the same thing. Was it allowed? Was it successful? And we see the same thing in terms of the canonical. You won't get any of this data if a page is not indexed. And finally, we have a healthy state. So we can see that the URL is on Google. It's indexed. We can see that it was in the sitemap. We can see that there are referring pages here. And we can also see a non-HTTPS link. And we get the same data. We can see that the page is served over HTTPS, which is fine. And we have valid enhancements here for a site links search box. So again, don't really need to worry too much about these. So these are the main things that you need to consider. Now, just going back to here, if Google doesn't index something, it will generally give you a reason. It doesn't always give you a reason. If the URL is not known to Google, it's never encountered it before, then obviously it's not going to give you an explanation if it didn't know the URL existed. But if it's aware of the URL already, where you'll find the reasons for Google not indexing stuff is under indexing and pages. So when we go into here and we scroll down, it basically tells us why pages aren't being indexed, and it tells us how many are in there, and we can go and look at those pages. But that is all for this video. So my name is Daniel Foley Carter of assertiveuk.com, SEO-audits.io, and www.seo-stack.io. So just one for my user base, or for those of you out there. We've basically been developing a Google Search Console equivalent. But obviously one of the benefits here is that we provide the ability to get Search Console data, but we also provide videos, training, and the tools and interface in here are generally more powerful. And we add the ability for you to log your work, track everything that you're doing, and SEO Stack will help you on your SEO journey. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to reach out. Thank you very much for watching.